Well, my friends, it just rang 9 church bells right here in my backyard here in St. Louis, Missouri. It is Saturday morning. It is July 24th. My name is John O'Leary, and I want to welcome you to Live Inspired Together. It's going to be an awesome episode where you and I are going to be choosing pragmatic optimism. There is a reason for joy in your lives today. So I'm going to give you all a moment to sign in from wherever you might be tuning in from here in the United States or around the world. As you do so, I do have a question for you. That's typically how we begin these. What's your name? That's a good place to begin. Where are you tuning in from personally? And what is one thing you learned this past week? Most nights when I'm tucking my kids in, we'll say our prayers, we'll talk about our days, we'll talk about what happened that was beautiful, what happened that might have been more challenging. But I always ask them, and what's one thing you learned today? What's one thing you learned? Sometimes it's a little bit easier pulling teeth, but there's always an answer eventually given. So today I'm going to ask you the same question, not just for the day, but for the entire week. As you look back over the previous 7 days, it's a lot of experiences, a lot of sunshine, maybe a little bit of rain too. What is one thing you learned about you? Maybe one thing you learned that mattered, one thing you learned that didn't, one thing you learned you've never heard of before. So give me one fact, one idea that mattered to you, and tell me where you're tuning in from right now. I'm looking forward to hearing from you while you are signing in and telling me where you're tuning in from and one thing you learned. I'd like to go first, and then I'll read a whole lot of your comments. One thing I learned is that 77 years of age is very young if you choose it to be. 77 years of age is very young if you choose it to be. How did I learn that, and why does that matter to you? Well, the former president of Starbucks, it's a little coffee company. I'm drinking some of the product right now in this here mug. His name is Howard Behar. Howard joined Starbucks when they were a little Pacific Northwest coffee shop with 23 stores. By the time he left Starbucks, it had more than 16,000 stores. Howard is 77 years of age today, and he is as robustly alive as anyone I have ever met. That's Howard Behar. Generous, joyful, faithful, passionate about serving people. He kept reminding me throughout the conversation, John, it wasn't about the coffee. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about the people. He ended the podcast. Okay, we're live on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and everywhere else. We're live everywhere. Now it's blasting out everywhere to people around the world. And he says, right as I'm about to say, thank you all for tuning in, Howard Behar says, John, before we go, I'd like to make sure people have a way to stay in touch with me. He then gives out his email and his cell phone on live national broadcast. This is a man who wants desperately to touch lives, to elevate lives, not only in his own backyard, not only from his place of ease and comfort, wherever he might have been tuning in from, but he wants to touch and elevate and impact lives around the world. Because for Howard, it's not about coffee. It never was. It's about people. It's about people. He's 77 and still living very large. So that's one thing I learned this week. How cool is that? I'm in my mid 40s, and I realized after visiting with Howard, I've got a lot of life to live still. One of my friends who is tuning in with me is Matt Miller today. He's tuning in from his old hometown in Corning, Iowa. So a shout out to my friends up in Corning, Iowa right now. Matt Miller, I'm going to bring you on to the stage with me. I'd love for you to share with our listeners and viewers one thing you learned this past week.
Well, you stole part of mine because obviously I was in the office live with you on Wednesday as we talked to our good friend Howard. And then that's all I've talked about. I've rewatched it. I've shared it with every single person that I've came in contact this week. And I love his line that he said, we were in the people business and we just happened to sell coffee. And so it's just a reminder, no matter where you're tuning in from, we're all in the people business. And no matter what we do, it all comes back to that. And for him to come on at the end and say, hey, John, can I share one more thing? Here's my cell number. Now, I text him that next day and said, hey, thank you. One of the best podcasts I've ever listened to. And at 10:37 at night, Central Time, I get a text back from Howard. And so I say that because when we look at you and say, hey, text us 314-207-5010, we're living exactly what Howard modeled, which is we want to be here to help you any way we can. So definitely a highlight.
Thank you, Matt. And it was a highlight for me too. Just a joyful guy. Another highlight, not to be outdone, is seeing all these comments that are streaming in from around the United States and around the world. Many of these are names that I now consider friends. I saw Bill Alexander's name pop up a moment ago. There's Heather's name popping up on the screen. Hello, Heather. Good morning to you. I saw Kim Seal in Dallas. Oh, there he is again. Hello, Kim Seal, working with Southwest Airlines. So a big shout out to the organization that I love, LUV, Southwest Airlines, in the house today. Nancy, welcome. I'm glad you're tuning in from Wildwood, Missouri. Jen, Lily, you know we love you. Thank you for your support and your friendship tuning in from Chicago. Vibrant Living from the Heart. Hello, Holly Tucci, all the way out from Washington. You learn to trust God more. We'll come back to that one in a moment. Stick around for it. Give me about 10 minutes to get there. And Nancy, I learned again to be thankful for the life that I have. It ain't easy. It ain't perfect, not this side of eternity, but it is all good. Raylene Murray, my friend from St. Louis. I know this. Vicky from North Carolina, we welcome you into the show as well. And how about we just share one more? Mary from Spring, Texas. Mary, I'm heading your way later on next week. Spring, Texas, baby. Thank you for tuning in. And if you have not yet told us where you're coming in from, please do so right now. And if you haven't yet shared with your community, most of the apps that you're tuning in from right now have a little link somewhere called share. They're called share. So do that right now. I think this is the kind of program today people on a Saturday morning absolutely will benefit from tuning into. So my next question to you is this. Generally speaking, are the headlines you read positive or negative? The headlines in social media, the ones you hear about while sipping coffee with a friend, the one you watch on your evening news on Fox, MSNBC, CNN. I'm going to bring all of you into the fold here. None of you can say I didn't give you a shout out. Are the stories, the headlines that you hear from our media pundits, are they typically positive or negative? I have a feeling as I'm starting to see the responses come in, most of you are writing in, and the majority of you who are not writing in are already thinking it. John, as Vicki Jones Young said, they're all negative. That's why I don't watch anymore. I'm going to put a little picture up of a representative of our evening news. So there's going to be a little slide. If you've watched the news over the past few days, weeks, years, decades, you will see this headline again and again and again on your evening news. You'll hear it on the morning drive. You'll hear it on many of the podcasts that you might tune into. You won't hear it on the Live Inspired. We don't hide from difficulty. We just choose to work to redeem it. The media, on the other hand, works to celebrate it, stir fear, and keep you tuning in while they sell you 2 minutes of commercials. That's not our goal here. Our goal is to unify and redeem. So today, my friends, I wanted to call it the fact that 94.5% of news stories, according to the Harvard Business Review, are negative. 94.5% of news stories are negative. But is that your world and is it our world? So I just wanted that to hang over us for a moment. Is that your world? 94.5% of your world or 94.5% of our world? Is it really as negative as they say? So today we're going to give you a little history lesson dating back to 1820 on 5 big areas of human life, because the media keeps telling you how bad your life is, how much danger you are in, how horrible everything is getting, and it is getting far worse. More at 10. I'll tell you more about it at 10. Tune in, pay attention to the commercials, buy their products. You're growing a huge conglomerate. But is that the full story? Is that the full story? And how do we tune into a better, more joyful, more pragmatically optimistic story in the days that you and I have control over? So let's talk about some stats that ought to be very relevant to you. I'm going to show you a slide going back to 1820 on basic education. So take some notes, my friends. But back in 1820, 83% of the world had attained absolutely no education. That number is now at 14%. We're just going to plow through a couple of these stats right now. The first one's about education. The second one is going to be about poverty. Poverty is a big deal. I'm not saying this is not something we don't need to worry about, focus on, and work to improve together. But in 1820, 16% of us were not living in extreme poverty. That number has dropped to only 9% of us now living in extreme poverty. So from 84% of the world to a little bit less than 9% of the world living in extreme poverty. That's still far too many. But I want you to pay attention to the trend lines. Okay, we're talking about trend lines today. We're talking about improvement today. We're talking about making our world and the world better today. So the next graph is going to be about child mortality. Anything above 0 is entirely too high, but please pay attention to the trend line here. 57% used to survive through 5 years. It's now more than 94% of us surviving more than 5 years. Just 2 more of these little graphs for you. The next one is this: democracy, which, we can all criticize democracy here in the United States and around the Western world, but you can see back in 1820 and 1850s, 1880s, my gosh, there was almost none. Now we are at about 50%. It is increasing, it is improving, and it is changing the lives of those who are blessed by it. There's another thing called the freedom ratio. It means the ability ultimately to be you, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, regardless of your creed, to freely be you. If you watch the news, you will be certain that that number continues to slip backward. And yet every metric around the Freedom Index is increasing. It is improving here in the United States and indeed around the world. It's not perfect, but it's getting better. One more slide to show you before I share with you a quote. This one is about your longevity. This is about your opportunity of possibly having a good, nice, long life going forward. You can see for about 2 millennia, the thing did not move at all. You're going to live to be about 28. Happy birthday on your 27th. You better live large, people. But then around 1200, it started improving a little bit. Industrial Revolution came along, and it has been increasing and improving not only in length, which is lovely, but also in vibrancy within those years, which is even better, my friends. So here's the final slide I want to share before my friend Matt Miller comes back onto the screen in a moment. A president who was in the United States serving in the 30s and in the 40s. He was nominated and elected 4 different times to be our president. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There are 3 pictures during those 4 different terms as president of him in a wheelchair. There are only 3 pictures of a man who spent the majority of his adult life in a wheelchair. The media then was not as focused at what was broken with individuals, apparently. They weren't trying to catch you. They weren't trying to grab you. They weren't trying to always cast you in the worst possible light. So it was with this context that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, elected for the 4th time, facing a global war, stands with the help of a crutch, metal braces, the help of a podium, and a son guiding him up to the podium to speak in front of a nation that is still at world war, a world that is still struggling. What will happen next? People dying in his own backyard and around the world. And he shared some language we need to be reminded of in mid-July of 2021. Here's a quote from FDR that I love and I have hanging high on my wall. So here, I'll give you my best FDR impression. The great fact to remember is that the trend of civilization itself is forever upward. That a line, live inspired community, drawn through the middle of the peaks and the valleys of the centuries, always has an upward trend. The great fact to remember is that line between the peaks and the valleys, the positives and the negatives over the course of centuries and over the course of your life has an upward trend. It does indeed have an upward trend. And yet sometimes in the busyness, in the chaos, in the mundane, in the media-centric nature of our lives, we forget that. We forget that. Today, I want to remind you again of that upward trend in our lives, but also in your life, And to help me do exactly that as we touch second base and get ready to race toward third is my Live Inspired coach. He's also my friend and yours. His name is Matt Miller. So Matt, with Bill Alexander and Jill and Lily and Vicky and Rana and Susanna and everyone else tuning in still from around the country, welcome back to Live Inspired. Tell me first, why is it that we feel so inundated with negativity? Why do we just feel like, we're cramped with anxiety, depression, and beat down by life?
Well, I'm first laughing because John proved right away being an impersonator and voice is not his strength. And so, sorry, I'm still laughing about that. But here's what I love for Live Inspired community, because our mission is changing the world, starting with our own. And as I'm reading through the comments, a lot of you have a pretty good handle on this, which is why we have to take the next step and help others do this. Because what we know is if we don't pay attention to our thoughts and words, over 80% of those can be negative. And so we really have to have a plan and pay attention to what that is. And a lot of you tuned in and are saying, I don't watch a lot of the news. I don't spend a lot of time on social media. I make sure I pay attention to who I hang out with, because those thoughts become words and start impacting what we do. And so our whole goal here at Live Inspired is that we know being less negative is more effective than being more positive. So my first challenge to you today, as you go to your journal, but let's go into the chat right now, because it's not so much adding to your to-do list of one more thing to do. It's actually looking at the list and saying, what is robbing me of my joy and my time and my attention? And what's one thing I can say no to? So in the chats, down in my lower right-hand corner there, if you will put in the chat, what is one thing that you will choose to say no to? In my week coming up, I'm going to choose not to watch a lot of the news. I don't spend a lot of time on social media. I have a plan if I encounter negativity, within my day. And so with that said, what's one thing you're going to choose to say no to in the coming week?
And in case it wasn't clear when Matt said it, type it in for us. Let's take it. Oh, I love Nick. I want to thank you, Nick, for talking about this. My wife and I were talking about this struggle so many people face, gossip. It may sound small, but it's a cancer. Gossip. I'm done gossiping. Nick, that's beautiful, man. Thank you for that. Bill Alexander, we love you, man. Rocking away right now, wherever you are tuning in from. Not watch the nightly news at all. Brother, I'm committed for 1 week to not be told how miserable the world is. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for living the other side of it. Nancy McMillan. Thoughts and words matter. I don't watch the news. I say no to negativity. Thank you. Rana, ugly talk, and the invitation to join in. I think you're joining Nick on that one, Rana. Thank you for sharing. Suzanne, the negative sarcasm. Suzanne, one thing I used to do is be, I think, far more sarcastic than I am today. And a friend of mine one time told me, John, that's just it's a weak version of humor. And it was a challenging thing to hear. It was hard for me to hear those words, but it is true. So to let go of some of that sarcasm, great advice. In the coming week, I choose to say no to the things that drain my energy and choose and increase my awareness to the things that drain it. Thank you for that, Vibrant Living. How about we just share one more? And this one from Jen Lilly. Again, worrying about things that I cannot control. Stay within your circle. Stay within your circle. One of my favorite podcasts, as we pivot away from the negativity now into the possibility and positivity and pragmatic optimism and ferocious joy of your lives. One of my favorite podcasts I ever recorded was not with Howard Behar, although I loved it. It was not with astronauts. It was not with Brene Brown. It was not with some other marathon runners and presidents and phenomenal leaders. I'm looking up at this podcast wall behind me right now. It was actually with one of my favorite leaders of all time. It was episode 00 of the Live Inspired podcast. If you've never checked out the Live Inspired podcast, do so today. You will love it. If you're not sure where to begin, why not begin at the very beginning? O'Leary's very first podcast was episode 00 with a woman named Susan O'Leary, my mom. I'm going to put a picture of my mom on the screen for you all right now so that you may connect with the beautiful lady that I'm celebrating right now. But that is a picture of my mom on the screen in front of you right there. She raised me. You can imagine, for those who know me, man, that is not easy. Okay, Matt works with me. O'Leary's kind of a wild card. Imagine what he was like when he was 4 or 7. Or imagine what it was like when you had a 9-year-old boy and you got a phone call that 9-year-old boy not only burned down the house, but also burned himself and 100% of his body. Imagine what it was like to endure 5.5 months while that little boy was in hospital, going through the treatment and the procedures and the struggles and the surgeries, losing his fingers to amputation, walking the halls each night in darkness, wondering, when I come back the following day, will my little boy be there? Will he be there? What's that pain like? How do you weather storms like that? While trying to rebuild that house that was burned down, while trying to parent 5 other kids who are longing for love, longing for safety, longing for security, longing to know that it's going to be okay, not only for their brother John, but their kids. So they want to know it's going to be okay for them too. My mother did a phenomenal job during that time. And she guided not only me, but those 5 other siblings through grade school, somehow into high school and beyond. She also, during this time, endured many other challenges that we won't even go into today. It's private, it's for the family, but we went through some storms. One of the storms that has been more talked about publicly was a second house fire. So the house burned down once, we can rebuild from that. When it burned down the second time, all the way down to the ground, that's devastating. And yet this woman kept showing up in life with joy. Throughout this entire experience, eventually her husband gets Parkinson's disease and has to deal with Parkinson's for 30 years. He and they have lost everything. Except there are 3 things that I see on my mother every single time I see her, wherever that might be. I see joy on her face. Not only on her mouth. I see it in her eyes. I see it in her smile. She's just got joy. I see her husband next to her. Throughout it all, this woman, now married for 53 years, her wingman. He's challenged these days. He's in a wheelchair these days. He can no longer walk these days. He struggles speaking these days. My dad is struggling swallowing these days. He's got mighty challenges, no doubt. But his wingman is always next to him, my mom. It's a beautiful love story that they are writing together. And the third thing that I noticed most recently was a license plate that she has had. She's had this for the last almost 10 years, but it has taken on new meaning over the last couple months. My dad has endured some recent surgeries. He's been through the ringer 10 different times. It's really been a difficult summer in many regards for our family, but that joy remains on my mother's face. Her husband remains next to her, and the license plate remains part of their daily journey. So as I go from that picture into the picture of us saying goodbye to mom and dad in the car, this is as my mom is taking my dad for procedures that's going to force him to be away from home for the next several weeks. As I followed my mom and dad to that facility, though, I noticed the license plate. I'm going to put it on the screen in front of you so you all can see it. JER29. So what is JER29? I want to read to you verbatim what Jeremiah 29 is. My mother's had this on her license plate during the good days and also during the days filled with struggle. Here it is. These are words of wisdom spoken from a great prophet to his people, but to all of us, I believe, today. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Prosper you and not to harm you. Give you hope and a future. My mom's life has been packed with challenge, and perhaps it's never been more challenging than this summer, and perhaps it's never been more challenging than this past week. And yet the last time I saw my mother, I also saw her car, and I saw on her car, stickered properly on the front of it and on the back of it, Jeremiah 29. She knows in her heart of hearts that there are plans for her that will prosper her. That doesn't mean make it easy, and it doesn't mean it's going to happen soon. In fact, if you know Bible, if you know your scripture well, you also realize that that statement was being shared right before that. By the way, this won't happen for 70 years. You're going to struggle, people in Babylon, for 70 years of hardship. But know this, in the end of the end, I know where the story goes, and it is a plan to prosper you and your children and your grandchildren and those who are going to come in line behind you. This is good news. My mother holds fast to it, and maybe today you and I can as well. So Matt Miller, one more picture before I bring you back up on the screen of my mom and dad able to see each other after my mother's COVID experience. Mom got COVID in the midst of everything else, along with 5 of her grandbabies. But this is when she was able to see her husband again for the first time. bringing him flowers, letting him know that she's still there. She still loves him. He still loves her, and that there are plans to prosper them going forward. So, Matt, in a marketplace that feels so beat down, so divided, we've picked up some things that maybe this week we're going to say goodbye to. We're not going to watch the evening news. We're not going to gossip. We're going to stop the self-talk. That's the stuff we're going to stop. But what can we opt into so we can begin living more joyfully, more optimistically, more passionately, more faithfully?
Well, and early on in the chat, if you scroll up, our good friend Jen Lilly, said it best when you think of Jeremiah 29. She said, it's things happen for me, not to me. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at that. And I love how everyone chatted in on the things we're saying no to. And what we help people more than anything in our coaching organization and here at Live Inspired, and especially this theme over the last few months, has been we know negative's going to happen, right? It's normal to have negative thoughts because we have anywhere from 80,000 to 2 million thoughts a day in our head. But what is the plan when negative shows up? That's the key. And the first step is saying no. And a lot of you tuning in, gossip, news, all of those pieces. In fact, John, our good friend Don Eggleston, he was in our prayers this week, and you saw him personally. But he reminds us that if we get into that gossip and we don't do something with it, it's our duty to transform that, right? Because if not, then we just empower it. So anyway, back to what we were talking about is that the key is, what is your plan when negative shows up in those thoughts? So is it getting up and taking a lap? Is it listening to music? Is it breathing? We have to have a plan every single day to know that when that negativity shows up in our world, we have a plan to say stop and get away from that. And so with that said, one last thing to put in the chats. We've said the one thing that we're going to say no to. What's the one thing you're going to say yes to? What's the plan when that negative shows up to transform that, as our friend Don would say, and get into that more neutral state? Because remember, what we know is being less negative is more effective than being more positive. We're not saying be positive all the time, right? But our topic today is optimism. And the only way we stay in that lane is to make sure we don't go down the lane of being negative. So one more time in the chat, right down there in the bottom right-hand corner, what's the one thing you're going to say yes to this week?
And Matt, while everyone is typing that in, you're mentioning Don Eggleston. Don Eggleston, the reason I saw him this week is because his mother passed away last week. And Don's heart breaks for his mom, and we break for both of them. Don is a dear friend of ours organizationally and one of the finest leaders and men Matt and I have ever met. Phenomenal guy. Words create worlds is one of Don's quotes. The words you speak, the words you hear create the world in which you live. So that's one of Don's famous favorite quotes. But one that he shared while he was eulogizing his mother was this. He said, because his mom also had a difficult life. He said, God comes to all of us disguised as our life. God comes to all of us disguised as our life. How do you want to interact with God? So as God comes to each of us disguised as our life, Don Eggleston and friends and Nick and Bill and Ronna and Brad and Jill and Nancy and Jane and everyone else tuning in, how do you want to interact with your life? How do you want to interact with your life? Bill's going to be more positive with others. Bill, I think that's great idea. A great idea. Nick, love each other, man. LEO, baby. Leo, Brad, living in the moment, making the present primacy. Awesome. We'll just share a few more. Nancy McMillan, positive affirmation, music, being out in nature. People, if you can't think of one, you may want to steal one of those because that's a great one. Prompts to pray when I'm facing negativity. Thank you for that, Jill. What a great opportunity. Just slow down and pray when you're facing the storm. Angela, meditate and give thanks for my blessings. Right on. Thank you, Angela. Suzanne, I try to remember to say to myself, choose Jesus. It stops me very well if I can just remember it. I think that's why my mom got a license plate. When you're taking a man who is struggling mightily, doctor's appointment to doctor's appointment every day of your life, it's also hard to be reminded of the joy, which is why Jeremiah 29 features prominently into my mother's vehicle. Oh, that's right. Plans to prosper. Plans to prosper. and not to harm. We'll share just one more. And then Matt and I were wondering today if you might have any questions. We're going to stick around just for a couple minutes afterwards to handle and answer anything that might be on your minds or your heart. So Rana, you'll get the last word before we pivot into any questions. But you, Rana Swanson, who have endured much, I will embrace the beauty and I will list all of the blessings. I have a journal where I record them. And on all the dark days, I go back and I read them. And I remember and I'm reminded of the goodness that I have seen. Drop the mic. On those dark days, we can be reminded of the goodness we have seen. My primary issue with the media, and because we are all tuning into it, although the Live Inspired channel apparently is not, is we forget the blessings we've received. We forget the trajectory that this line is on, and we forget our role in making it better going forward. An optimist doesn't view the challenge in front of us as not being legit. They just feel, and you and I feel empowered that if we've gone through far worse than this, we can make it even far better tomorrow than it is today. So we are empowered now to take the next right step forward. My friends, it is buzzing in at 10:30 on the East Coast. It is 7:30 in the great state of California, Washington, and Oregon. It's 9:30 right now where I'm tuning in from here in St. Louis, Missouri. If you have any questions as we wrap up, Matt and I are going to stick around and just kind of have a little bit of fun today for about 10 minutes. So if you have any questions for us right now, awesome. We look forward to discussing life with you right now. This is After Hours. O'Leary and Miller Unplugged with the Live Inspired community. The official Live Inspired Together piece is over. The next time we will return is August 21st, I believe. It's a third Saturday of August. We're going to be back. We're going to have a phenomenal session on how, in the midst of returning to work for some of us, sending kids off to school, for others, grandkids off to school, sending kids off to college, how you can take the next right step forward in your journey to ensure not only you finish the summer strong, but you get ready to finish the season of life even stronger. So I'm seeing a whole lot of thank yous coming in from Ricardo and Joy and Vibrant Living, among many others. If you haven't yet shared this, what an awesome opportunity to say, hey guys, you ought to tune into some inspirational content that I tune into monthly on the Live Inspired Together piece, weekly on the Live Inspired podcast piece, because they're phenomenal. So check out the Live Inspired podcast piece. Oh, and Joyce, you remind us, read the inspirational books like yours, John, in awe, right on. If you're looking for a worthy book to check out this season, may I recommend going to readinawe.com, www.readinawe.com. Not only can you learn more about the book In Awe or the book On Fire or the book Overwhelming Odds from my mom and dad, you can also take a 21-day free hope challenge. So thank you for the reminder. Go to readinawe.com. Jill, you are welcome. We appreciate you. What is your favorite? Yeah.
Go. I was going to give you the heads up. Jane had texted in what the favorite book is you're reading right now.
So one of my favorite books, I picked it up again. It's called Endurance. It's a story about Shackleton. Sir Shackleton leaves, I believe, Ireland and eventually London and heads for the South Pole. It's a beautiful book around struggles showing up in front of people and how individually and collectively they can choose to rise above them. So that is a beautiful book that I'm reading, kind of bedside reading, more like beach type reading, but really good. I read a book this past week by a gentleman named Bihar. Howard Bihar wrote a book called It's Not About the Coffee. The president of Starbucks, who grew a $100 billion business, wrote a book about how he achieved success within Starbucks, and he titled the book It's Not About the Coffee. So I read that book this past week, really enjoyed it. Reading a book right now. Oh man, the book is at home, but it's by a guy named Jim McCloskey. Jim McCloskey, who we're going to bring onto the podcast next week, is a man who was pursuing all the normal things in life. And then he recognized what ultimately mattered most in life. And this is a man who spent the last 4 decades of his life trying to liberate people who've been wrongly convicted of crime. Whether I won't even go through the types of crimes he has fought to get these people out. But currently, he has already liberated 67 people who were wrongly convicted of violent crimes. 4 of the people that he has freed were on death row. One of them was 5 days away from being killed for a crime that he did not commit. So when you think about some of the struggles you face, the struggles are all around us and within us. But Jim, rather than just seeing them and saying, oh, that's really bad, works to redeem them. So you're going to learn more about Jim McCloskey, his incredible life, and the lives that he has helped save. Phenomenal story. That's one thing I'm reading. Jen, we're blessed to call you our friend too. And Matt, why don't you take us to the finish line?
So I'll share my book.
Nancy too.
Yeah, and then one question that we have up there. But the last couple of months, what I've referenced is that, when you boil the day down, it's really you against yourself, right? And so what we talked about today is so critical of not only saying no to things, but what you're saying yes to. And so the book that's out there that I'm reading right now, it's called Positive Intelligence. And it's just a reminder that we have these saboteurs, especially a judge, and our own judge is there to sabotage us throughout the day. But then we have these people on the other side of the shoulder, our sages, that are here to remind us of what we can choose to do. And so just a great book out there that reminds us that, again, negativity is going to happen, but what's your plan and how you don't let your judge and your inner voice and your saboteurs take your joy away. And so, John, one last question that popped up that I think we can address and go from there. And again, I just want to reiterate, why are we taking this time? There's a lot of you tuning in today that have been with us for a long time, and we want to make sure that we are always here for you. So a reminder before I forget, if there's anything we can be helping with, if you're new to tuning into this and you want to stay connected to us, text 314-207-5010. That is a direct connection to John and I right here. And if there's anything we can ever do to help, we are just one text away. And our friend Howard modeled that so beautifully today as well, or this week as well on our podcast. So John, back over to you on that last question.
Perfect, Matt. And it comes in from our friend Nancy. How do you deal with people who have significantly helped financially make their life better? Then when it is time for you to pay them back financially with physical assistance, they turn around and continually stab you in the back. Nancy, so I'm glad we only have 45 minutes to answer this final question, because we'll need 46 minutes to even begin to whisper truth your way. The very first thing I would remind you of is when you help someone financially, in particular, if it's a family member or a friend, as my friend Dave Ramsey would say, you did not help them financially, you gave them a gift. That's all you did. You weren't trying to get interest on it. You weren't ever trying to get paid back on it. And if you thought you did, you probably came into it with the wrong expectation. We've all done this. I've done it. Probably have family members and friends tuning in right now saying, I've learned, though, when I give a gift to cut the string and never look back. And so when you decide to give financially, just recognize you have given them a gift expecting nothing in return. That will liberate you from ever expecting anything from them. I know that's hard to hear and it's unfair, but so is life sometimes. So control the things you can, let go of the things you cannot. It sounds like this is just one of those situations where you will not be paid back financially. And in your case, for whatever reason, Nancy, it sounds like it's also not coming back to you emotionally either. There is a book that we gave out this year to all my coworkers that I work with, including Matt Miller, and the 2 words on it. The second word is excellence. What I wanted to remind Matt and the entire team of is working with excellence in front of them, drawing them forward. But the other word, the first word on the journal, was the word grace. The reason I gave my coworkers these little journals this year, though, was less about grace to people who voted differently than them, or looked differently than them, or worshiped differently than them, or stabbed them in the back, or whatever else the thing is. We need grace for that, no doubt. But the real reason, in the midst of a global pandemic, when some of our friends were going through difficulties in their relationships and others financially, was to look in the mirror and first and foremost, offer a lot of grace to that human being, to that individual, because that is where it begins. So when you look at your friend, your family member, your neighbor who has stabbed you in the back, be carried forward by excellence. Don't expect to be paid back financially, unfortunately. Offer them a little bit of grace, but also as you're feeling these emotions of heartache and disappointment, where I would invite you to turn first is to the mirror and look at her and offer that woman an awful lot of grace, because you're feeling the right emotions. But just because they're right doesn't mean they're life-giving, and does not mean they're going to benefit you going forward. So I just encourage you to let go of that rock to move forward. One of the hardest things we can do in our life is to surrender. That's not the same as waving the white flag of quitting. It just means letting go of the things that we cannot control. And it sounds like in this situation, Nancy, this is the kind of relationship you will not be able to control. So I would love this person, but I would love this person first and foremost by loving the one in the mirror. Grace and excellence.
Hey, John, can I add to that? Is thanks to this community, every single week, we at Live Inspired are giving to an organization, to a family, and we have stories that come in each week. And thanks to this community, we give every single week. And when we give, it brings us joy. And in some of those cases, we don't hear back from them, but that is not where we spend any of our time. We spend time in giving and helping others and finding joy in that. And so I just, again, want to highly encourage you to do the same, to give. And if you get caught in that emotion, forgive and move forward. And so I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank this community who gives a lot of their time and their resources to help us continue to change the world, starting with our own. And we can't thank you enough for that.
Well, my friends, I think Matt has succinctly summarized how we feel about this program today. Is there negativity out there? Absolutely. Are the headlines reminding us that it's hard? Absolutely. Is there indeed a headwind that we face? Yes. Life will not be perfect this side of eternity. But I wanted to remind you, with the help of my friend Matt and then our entire Live Inspired community, that the foundation does indeed remain firm, that you are not alone, that your life has value and worth, and that the best days do indeed remain in front of us. For I have a plan for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, not to harm you. The best days are in front of you. So grace and excellence for this time. And until next time, my name is John O'Leary. That on the screen also is my friend Matt Miller. And today is our collective days. Live Inspired.